Lieutenant Commander Katie Morgan walked through the corridors of the carrier ship, resolute with her back straight and her hands folded behind her. She nodded politely at every crew member she passed. She smiled at the ones who greeted her by name. She was the picture of calm, controlled professionalism, and she had worked very hard to become that way. 12 years. That was how long Katie had spent building her reputation as the most disciplined pilot in the entire Terran Defense Fleet. Her call sign was Saint, and every pilot in the fleet knew why she had earned it. She had never lost her temper in public. She had never raised her voice at a superior officer. She had 3 humanitarian commendations on her record for rescue missions where she had risked her own life to save civilians. When people talked about Katie Morgan, they used words like composed and graceful and diplomatic. The aliens of the Galactic Coalition had a different opinion of humanity in general. They thought humans were emotional creatures who could not control their violent impulses. They thought humans were dangerous and unpredictable. They thought humans started wars for sport and killed for pleasure. Katie had made it her personal mission to prove them wrong, one handshake at a time. Admiral Paula Bennett had recognized Katie's value early in her career. The Admiral was a practical woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had pulled Katie aside after a particularly difficult diplomatic function where a Velthari ambassador had called humanity a war-addicted species right to Katie's face. Katie had smiled and thanked the ambassador for his perspective. She had not flinched. She had not shown any anger at all. "You're wasted as just a pilot," the Admiral had told her that night. "I want you to be the face we show the Coalition. Can you do that?" Katie had said yes. She had been saying yes ever since. The Galactic Coalition was a group of 37 different alien species who had formed an alliance for trade and mutual defense. Humanity had been trying to join the coalition for almost 20 years. The process was slow because most of the alien species did not trust humans. They had watched humanity's wars from a distance. They had studied human history and seen the blood that stained almost every page. They were afraid of what humans might do if they were given access to coalition technology, and coalition trade routes. Katie understood their fear. She even thought it was reasonable. Humans had done terrible things to each other throughout history, but she also believed that humanity had changed. She believed that humans could be peaceful if they were given the chance. And she believed that the best way to prove this was to show the aliens a human who was calm and kind and gentle, no matter what they said or did to her. So Katie attended every diplomatic function with a smile on her face. She learned 17 different alien greetings in 17 different languages. She practiced bowing to species that considered handshakes offensive. She memorized the dietary restrictions of every coalition race, so she would never accidentally insult someone by offering them the wrong food. She became an expert in alien body language, so she could tell when a Kreth ambassador was pleased or when a Velthari diplomat was lying. The Kreth were massive creatures covered in hard plates like armor. They came from a heavy gravity world, and they respected strength above all else. The Velthari were tall and thin with too many joints in their arms and legs. They valued cunning and deception, and they considered honesty to be a weakness. These two species were the most powerful members of the coalition, and they were also the most suspicious of humanity. Katie had spent years winning their trust. She had attended their ceremonies and eaten their food and listened to their complaints about humanity without ever losing her temper. She had become so good at diplomacy that some of the younger officers called her the human who forgot how to be human. They did not know how wrong they were. There was another side to Katie Morgan, a side that only existed in the classified combat simulations deep in the belly of the Resolute, a side that her crewmates whispered about when they thought no one was listening. The training room was a sealed chamber where pilots could practice combat scenarios against simulated enemies. The simulations were incredibly realistic. The D-forces were real. The danger felt real. And the performance data was recorded for review, though the footage was supposed to be automatically deleted after 72 hours. That was standard protocol. No one was supposed to keep copies of training footage. No one was supposed to see what the pilots did when they thought no one was watching. Katie spent 4 hours in the training room every night after her diplomatic duties were finished. She told people she was practicing defensive maneuvers and rescue techniques. That was partially true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Katie Morgan was not just a good pilot. She was a predator wearing the skin of a diplomat. She was a warrior who had taught herself to smile instead of snarl. And when she was alone in that training room, surrounded by simulated enemies, she let herself become what she truly was. She did not just defeat her simulated opponents. She destroyed them. She hunted them through asteroid fields and laughed while she did it. She used tactics that no one had ever seen before. Tactics that were creative and brutal and terrifyingly effective. She pushed her simulated ship beyond its limits, and she pushed herself even harder. The crew of the Resolute had noticed strange things over the years. They had noticed that Katie always seemed tired in the mornings, even though she went to bed at a reasonable hour. They had noticed that the training room always smelled like sweat and ozone when she was finished with it. They had noticed that the simulation's difficulty settings were always maxed out after her sessions, even though the computer was supposed to reset them automatically. But no one had ever seen the footage. No one knew what Katie really did in that room. No one knew that the saint of the Terran Defense Fleet was actually one of the most dangerous combat pilots humanity had ever produced. That was about to change. Petty Officer Danny Cole was a young technician who worked in the ship's data systems department. He was running a routine diagnostic on the backup servers when he found something strange. A corrupted file fragment that should have been deleted weeks ago. The fragment was only 18 seconds long. It had pieced itself together from scattered data blocks during a system purge, like a ghost rebuilding itself from digital dust. Danny opened the file without thinking. What he saw made him forget how to breathe. It was Katie Morgan. But it was not the Katie Morgan anyone knew. And those 18 seconds were about to change everything. Danny Cole sat frozen in his chair, staring at the monitor in front of him. His coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he had not noticed. He could not look away from what he was seeing. He could not make sense of it. The woman in the footage was Lieutenant Commander Katie Morgan. He recognized her face, but everything else about her was wrong. In the footage, Katie was inside the combat simulation chamber. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat and clinging to her body. Her hair had come loose from its tight regulation bun and was hanging around her face in wild tangles. Her eyes were wide and bright and filled with something that Danny could only describe as joy. Not the polite, controlled happiness she showed at diplomatic events. This was something deeper and darker and much more real. The simulation showed her ship surrounded by enemies. 12 Kreth warships had boxed her into an asteroid field with massive rocks floating all around her. There was no clear escape route. Her shields were down to 3% according to the display. Her weapons were almost empty. Any reasonable pilot would have surrendered or ejected. Any sane person would have accepted that the simulation was over. Katie was laughing. The sound came through the speakers tinny and broken because of the file corruption, but Danny could hear it clearly enough. It was not a nervous laugh or a scared laugh. It was the laugh of someone who was having the time of their life. It was the laugh of a hunter who had just spotted her prey. "You think you have me cornered?" Her voice was different too. Harder, sharper, like a blade being pulled from its sheath. "You want to see what a human does when she is cornered? Let me show you." What happened next lasted only 18 seconds, but Danny would remember it for the rest of his life. Katie did not try to run. She did not try to hide behind the asteroids. Instead, she flew straight at the two nearest enemy ships. Her crippled fighter should not have been able to move that fast. She was pushing the engines far beyond their safe limits. Warning lights were flashing all over her cockpit, but she ignored them completely. At the last possible second, she rolled her ship sideways and slipped through the tiny gap between the two enemy vessels. The gap was so small that her wingtips scraped against their hulls. The friction should have torn her ship apart. Instead, it sent both enemy vessels spinning into each other. They collided with a silent explosion that filled the screen with light. Katie did not slow down. She did not even look back. She was already targeting the next ship. Her weapons were almost empty, so she stopped using them. She started using her ship as a weapon instead. She vented her own atmosphere through the side thrusters to create extra thrust. The sudden decompression should have killed her, but she had already sealed her helmet. She used the burst of speed to ram a third enemy ship directly in its engine section. The impact destroyed the enemy vessel, but it also sent Katie's ship tumbling out of control. Any other pilot would have been disoriented. Any other pilot would have taken precious seconds to regain control. Katie used the spin. She let her ship rotate wildly while she fired her last remaining missiles at targets. She could only see for split seconds at a time. 3 more enemy ships exploded. Now there were 6 enemies left, and they were starting to panic. The simulation was programmed to make the enemy ships behave realistically, and realistic enemies got scared when they watched their friends die. The 6 remaining ships tried to regroup. They tried to coordinate their attack patterns. They were too slow. Katie grabbed a chunk of asteroid debris with her ship's cargo claws. The debris was 3 times the size of her fighter. She swung it like a club, smashing it into an enemy ship that was trying to line up a shot. The enemy ship crumpled like paper. 5 enemies left. She released the debris and dove toward the asteroid field's core, where the rocks were thickest and most dangerous. The enemy ships followed her. They were faster and better armed, but they were also bigger. They could not fit through the gaps that Katie's small fighter squeezed through. 2 of them crashed into asteroids trying to follow her. 3 enemies left. Katie burst out of the asteroid field on the other side. Waiting for her were the support vessels that had been staying safely out of the fight. Cargo ships, medical frigates, command vessels. They were not combat ships. They were not supposed to be targets. But Katie was not following the rules anymore. She flew through the support fleet like a shark through a school of fish. She was out of missiles. She was out of ammunition. She was almost out of fuel. But she still had her ship's thrusters, and she still had her hatred. She used her engine exhaust as a weapon, flying close enough to the enemy ships that her thruster flames melted through their hulls. She crashed her ship in the sensor arrays and communication towers. She carved a path of destruction through the support fleet while the 3 remaining combat ships tried desperately to catch her. By the time the simulation ended, all 12 warships were destroyed. The entire support fleet was disabled or destroyed. Katie's kill count for that single engagement was 47 vessels. Her ship was a wreck. Her systems were failing. Her life support was almost gone. But she was still alive. And she was still laughing. The footage cut off there. The file was too corrupted to show anything else. But Danny had seen enough. His hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped his coffee mug. He set it down carefully on his desk, and then he just sat there, trying to process what he had just witnessed. This was not the Katie Morgan that everyone knew. This was not the saint. This was something else entirely. Something that had been hidden behind that calm smile and those polite words. Something dangerous. Danny knew he should delete the file. He knew he should pretend he had never seen it. The footage was classified for a reason. It was supposed to be destroyed for a reason. If anyone found out that he had a copy, he would be in serious trouble. but he could not bring himself to delete it. It was too important, too incredible. He had to keep it, at least for a little while, just until he figured out what to do with it. He saved the file to his personal drive. He told himself it was for archival purposes. He told himself he would delete it later, after he had time to think. He never got the chance. 3 days later, during a diplomatic banquet aboard the Coalition station called Harmony Prime, the footage was broadcast on every screen in the galaxy. Every alien species in the Coalition saw it at the same time. They saw humanity's most composed diplomat laughing as she destroyed 47 ships. They saw the truth behind the smile, and nothing would ever be the same again. The diplomatic banquet aboard Harmony Prime was supposed to be a celebration. 5 years of careful negotiations had finally resulted in a preliminary agreement that would allow humanity to begin the final stages of Coalition membership. The massive station's grand hall was filled with representatives from 37 different alien species, all gathered to mark this historic occasion. Katie Morgan sat at the human delegation's table with her usual serene smile. She was wearing her dress uniform, pressed and perfect. Her hair was pulled back in its regulation bun, without a single strand out of place. She had spent the last hour making pleasant conversation with a Kreth, trade minister who smelled like sulfur and kept trying to touch her hair. She had not complained. She had not shown any discomfort. She had simply smiled and gently redirected his hands while complimenting his people's architectural achievements. Admiral Paula Bennett sat beside her, looking proud. The Admiral had worked just as hard as Katie to reach this moment. She had sacrificed her personal life, her health, and countless hours of sleep to get humanity to this point. Seeing the preliminary agreement signed was supposed to be the greatest achievement of her career. Ambassador Kethril of the Velthari hegemony stood at the podium at the front of the hall. He was tall and thin, with too many joints in his long arms. His skin was pale gray, and his eyes were completely black. He was giving a speech about the importance of military restraint and the dangers of unchecked aggression. It was clearly aimed at humanity, but Katie kept smiling. She had heard worse. The Coalition has survived for 10,000 years because we value peace above all else, Kethril was saying. We do not allow warmongering species to join our ranks. We do not permit violence as a solution to problems. Any species that wishes to be part of our community must demonstrate that they share these values. Katie nodded along politely. She had heard this speech 100 times in 100 different forms. She knew exactly what Kethril was implying. He was reminding everyone that humanity was on probation. One wrong move and the agreement would be cancelled. Then the screens flickered. Every display in the grand hall changed at the same time. The Velthari symbol that had been floating behind the podium vanished. In its place was footage that Katie recognized immediately. Footage that she had thought was deleted. Footage that showed her in the combat simulation chamber, surrounded by enemies, laughing as she tore them apart. The audio kicked in a moment later, echoing through the suddenly silent hall. Come on then. Show me what you have got. Show me why your species thinks it can push humanity around. Katie felt her blood turn to ice. She could not move. She could not breathe. She could only sit there and watch as every alien in the room turned to stare at her. The calm, composed mask she had worn for 12 years was cracking. She could feel it breaking apart piece by piece. The footage played for 18 seconds. 18 seconds of destruction. 18 seconds of her laughing and killing and loving every moment of it. When it ended, the hall was completely silent. Then Ambassador Kethril spoke. This, he said slowly, is the face of human diplomacy? His voice was cold and sharp like a knife. He pointed one long finger at Katie, who was still frozen in her seat. This is what hides behind your smiles and your peaceful words. This is the truth of humanity? The Kreth ambassador rose from his seat. He was massive, easily 3 times Katie's size, covered in plates of natural armor that made him look like a walking tank. His name was Grog Tal, and he had been one of the strongest supporters of human membership in the coalition. He had believed Katie when she told him that humans wanted peace. He had trusted her. Now he was looking at her like she was something disgusting he had found on the bottom of his foot. "You lied to us," Groktal said. His voice was deep and rumbling like thunder. "All these years, you have been lying to us, pretending to be peaceful while hiding your true nature." Admiral Bennett was on her feet now, trying to salvage the situation. "This is clearly a training simulation," she said quickly. "All species conduct combat training. This footage proves nothing about humanity's intentions. We train our pilots to defend themselves. That is all." "Defend themselves?" Kefral laughed, and the sound was cold and mocking. "Is that what you call this? Your pilot destroyed 47 ships while laughing. She used her own vessel as a weapon. She attacked non-combat targets. This is not defense. This is bloodlust." Other ambassadors were standing now. The Velthari delegation was gathering their things, preparing to leave. The Kreth were doing the same. 3 more species followed, then 4, then 5. Within minutes, half the room was emptying out. Katie finally found her voice. "Please," she said, standing up. "Let me explain." "There is nothing to explain." Groktal turned his back on her. "We have seen what you really are. The negotiations are over." He walked out of the hall without looking back. The other Kreth followed him. Then the Velthari left, with Kefral pausing at the door just long enough to give Katie one last contemptuous look. The diplomatic progress of the past 5 years crumbled in less than 10 minutes. Admiral Bennett collapsed back into her chair. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. She looked like someone who had just watched everything she had worked for turn to ash. Katie stood alone in the middle of the emptying hall. The screens had returned to normal, showing the Velthari symbol again, but it was too late. Everyone had seen the footage. Everyone knew her secret. But Katie was not thinking about the failed negotiations. She was not thinking about the aliens who had walked out or the damage that had been done to humanity's reputation. She was thinking about something else entirely. The footage had been deleted. She was certain of that. The training room systems automatically erased all recordings after 72 hours. There should have been no way for anyone to recover that footage and broadcast it across the galaxy. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had found the footage, saved it, and waited for the perfect moment to release it. Someone wanted to sabotage humanity's relationship with the coalition, and Katie was going to find out who. She turned and walked out of the hall, ignoring the stares of the remaining delegates. Her diplomatic smile was gone. In its place was something harder and colder. Something that looked a lot like the woman in the footage. The saint was dead. Now, it was time for Katie Morgan to show the galaxy what she was really capable of. Katie Morgan moved through the corridors of the Resolute like a ghost. The ship had been docked at Harmony Prime for the diplomatic banquet, and most of the crew was still on the station, unaware of what had happened. The corridors were empty and silent. Katie preferred it that way. She did not want to see anyone. She did not want to explain herself. She only wanted answers. She had spent the shuttle ride back to the ship, thinking about who could have done this. The footage had been stored on the ship's backup servers. Access to those servers was restricted to senior officers and technical staff. Someone with high-level clearance had recovered the corrupted file, saved it, and then transmitted it to Harmony Prime at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. There were only a handful of people on the Resolute who had that kind of access. Katie had mentally crossed off most of them during the shuttle ride. Admiral Bennett had no motive. The senior officers had worked too hard on the negotiations to sabotage them now. That left the technical staff, and there was only one technician who had been acting strangely over the past few days. Danny Cole had been avoiding eye contact with Katie since Tuesday. He had changed direction twice when he saw her coming down a corridor. He had been nervous and jumpy during the morning briefings. Katie had noticed these things, but had not thought much of them at the time. Now they made perfect sense. Danny's quarters were on deck 7. Katie took the stairs instead of the lift, moving quickly and quietly. She did not want to give him any warning. She did not want to give him time to destroy evidence or prepare a lie. His door was locked. The privacy chime was disabled, which meant he did not want to be disturbed. Katie did not care. She pulled a small tool from her pocket and began working on the lock. It was a skill she had learned years ago, back before she became a diplomat. Back when she was just another pilot who sometimes needed to get into places she was not supposed to be. The lock clicked. Open in under 30 seconds. Danny Cole was sitting on his bed with his back against the wall. He looked terrible. His face was pale, and his eyes were red like he had been crying. When the door slid open and Katie stepped inside, he let out a small sound that was halfway between a gasp and a whimper. "You have about 60 seconds to explain," Katie said. Her voice was calm and controlled, but there was something underneath it that made Danny press himself harder against the wall. "After that, I'm going to stop being diplomatic." "I did not send it," Danny said immediately. His words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "I swear on my life, I did not send that footage. I found it on the backup servers during a routine diagnostic. It had recovered itself from scattered data fragments. I saved it to my personal drive, but I never shared it with anyone. I never told anyone I had it." Katie took a step closer. Danny flinched. "Then how did it end up on every screen in Coalition space?" "I do not know." Danny's voice cracked. "Someone must have accessed my personal drive. Someone with high-level clearance. Someone who knew the file was there, even though I never told anyone about it." Katie studied his face carefully. She had spent 12 years learning to read people. She had trained herself to spot lies in the body language of aliens whose species expressed emotions completely differently than humans. Reading Danny Cole was easy by comparison. He was terrified. That much was obvious. But underneath the fear, she could see something else. Confusion. Genuine bewilderment. He truly did not understand how the footage had been leaked. He was telling the truth. Katie let out a slow breath. Some of the tension left her shoulders. She had been prepared to hurt Danny if he had been the one responsible. She was glad she did not have to. "You saved the file to your personal drive," she said slowly, thinking out loud. "You never told anyone about it. But someone found it anyway and transmitted it at exactly the right moment to destroy the negotiations." Danny nodded miserably. "I have been trying to figure it out since the broadcast. I checked my access logs. Someone did get into my personal drive, but the intrusion was hidden behind layers of fake authentication codes. Whoever did this was good. Really good. Better than anyone on this ship." Katie's eyes narrowed. "Show me the logs." Danny scrambled off the bed and hurried to his computer terminal. His hands were shaking as he pulled up the access logs. Katie leaned over his shoulder to look at the screen. The intrusion was subtle. If Danny had not been looking for it, he never would have found it. Someone had accessed his personal drive approximately 6 hours before the broadcast. They had copied the video file and then erased all traces of their presence. The authentication codes used for the intrusion were fake, but they were very well-made fakes. They would have fooled most security systems. But Katie recognized the pattern. She had seen this kind of work before. Valtteri, she said quietly. Danny looked up at her. What? This intrusion was done by Veltri hackers. I recognized their signature. They use a specific method of creating fake authentication codes that is unique to their species. I have seen intelligence reports about it. But why would the Veltri want to sabotage the negotiations? They have been pushing for humanity to join the coalition for years. Katie shook her head slowly. No, they have been pretending to push for it. But the Veltri are not like us. They do not value honesty. They play games within games. If they have been secretly working against humanity this whole time, no one would have noticed until it was too late. She straightened up and looked down at Danny. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something else, understanding and anger. They used me, he said. They let me find that file. They wanted me to save it so they could steal it later. Yes, Katie agreed. They needed a human to be the one who recovered the footage. That way, when it was broadcast, everyone would assume a human was responsible. It would look like we leaked our own secrets. It would make us look incompetent and untrustworthy. Danny's hands clenched into fists. Those bastards. Katie smiled. It was not her diplomatic smile. It was the smile from the footage. The one that meant she was done being nice. Petty Officer Cole, she said. I am going to need your help with something. Danny looked up at her. And for the first time since she had entered his quarters, he did not look scared. He looked determined. Whatever you need, he said. Let us make them pay. Katie nodded. The hunt was about to begin. 1 week had passed since the broadcast incident. 1 week of chaos and accusations and crumbling alliances. The Galactic Coalition had called an emergency session of the full council to discuss humanity's future membership. Representatives from 37 species had gathered in the Great Chamber of Harmony Prime, and most of them were not happy. The Kreth delegation sat in their massive chairs, their armored bodies still and silent. They had not spoken to any humans since the broadcast. Ambassador Groktal had made it clear that he considered the negotiations dead. The Veltri sat across the chamber, looking smug and satisfied. Ambassador Kethro had been giving interviews to coalition media outlets all week, expressing his deep concern about humanity's violent nature and his reluctant conclusion that humans were not ready for membership. Admiral Paula Bennett stood at the podium, looking like she had aged 10 years in 7 days. She had spent the entire week trying to salvage the situation through traditional diplomatic channels. She had apologized. She had explained. She had begged. Nothing had worked. The coalition species had made up their minds. Humanity was going to be expelled. The Admiral was halfway through her closing statement, asking for one more chance to prove humanity's commitment to peace. When the chamber doors opened, Katie Morgan walked in. She was not wearing her dress uniform. She was wearing her flight suit, the same one she had worn in the training footage. It was clean and pressed, but it was clearly combat gear. Several ambassadors gasped. In coalition culture, wearing combat attire to a council session was considered a threat display. It was the equivalent of walking into a peace conference with a weapon in your hand. Admiral Bennett's face went white. This was not part of the plan. This was not what they had discussed. Lieutenant Commander Morgan, Ambassador Kethral said coldly, rising from his seat. Have you come to threaten us in person? Have you come to show us more of humanity's true nature? Katie walked to the center of the chamber and stopped. She looked around at the gathered ambassadors, meeting their eyes one by one. Some of them looked away. Others stared back with hostility or fear. No, Ambassador, Katie said. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the vast space. I have come to present evidence. She pulled a small device from her pocket and activated the chamber's display system. The screens around the room flickered, and a new video began to play. it showed a Veltri technical facility. The footage was grainy and clearly recorded through some kind of hidden camera, but the content was unmistakable. Veltri technicians were gathered around a computer terminal, working on something. One of them looked up and spoke to the camera, apparently unaware it was there. The intrusion into the human ship systems was successful. We have recovered the combat footage from the pilot's training sessions. We will hold it until the moment is right. The video cut to another scene. The same technicians were now watching the diplomatic banquet on their own screens. One of them had his hand on a control panel. Now, one of them said, "Broadcast it now." The screens in the council chamber showed the footage being transmitted to Harmony Prime at the exact moment when Ambassador HFY was giving his speech about military restraint. The timing had been deliberate. The Veltri had planned everything. The council chamber exploded into chaos. Ambassador HFY was on his feet, shouting denials in his native language. The translator systems were struggling to keep up with his rapid speech. Other Veltri delegates were trying to leave the chamber, but found their way blocked by security drones that had activated automatically when the evidence was presented. Ambassador Groktal of the Krath rose slowly from his seat. His massive body seemed to fill the entire section of the chamber where his delegation was seated. He turned to look at HFY, and his expression was not friendly. "You have lied to us," Groktal said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "You have manipulated us. You have tried to use us as weapons against the humans." "This evidence is fabricated," HFY insisted. "The humans created it to frame us. Can you not see what they are doing?" "I can see exactly what is happening." Groktal turned to look at Katie. "How did you obtain this footage, human?" Katie met his gaze without flinching. "The Veltri used a backdoor program to access our ship's systems. They installed it during a routine maintenance inspection 3 months ago. Once we knew what to look for, we were able to trace their intrusion back to its source. We found their hidden servers. We found their records. We found everything." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I want to be clear about something, Ambassador. The footage of my combat simulation was real. I'm not going to apologize for it." A ripple of surprise went through the chamber. This was not what anyone had expected her to say. "Humans train to fight because fighting is sometimes necessary," Katie continued. "We do not start wars, but we finish them. We have been trying to join your coalition for 20 years. We have been patient. We have been polite. We have smiled through insults and swallowed our pride, because we believed that peace was more important than our dignity." She turned to face Ambassador HFY directly. "The difference between humanity and species like yours is that we choose when to show our teeth. We have been choosing diplomacy for years, not because we are weak, but because we prefer peace. But if you mistake our restraint for submission, you will learn why every species that has ever attacked Earth came to regret it." The chamber was completely silent. Even HFY had stopped protesting. Katie looked around at the gathered ambassadors one more time. "We are not asking you to love us. We are not asking you to trust us completely. We are only asking you to judge us by our actions, not by training footage that was stolen and broadcast without our consent. We have been peaceful neighbors for 20 years. We have traded fairly. We have honored our agreements. We have saved lives during disasters and defended shipping lanes from pirates. That is who we are. That is what humanity offers the coalition." She stepped back from the center of the chamber. "The choice is yours." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ambassador Groktal rose again. "The human makes a valid point," he said slowly. "We have seen how they fight. We have also seen that they have chosen not to fight us, even when provoked. They had every reason to respond to the Velthari's manipulation with violence. Instead, They responded with evidence and words. Perhaps this is more meaningful than we realized. One by one, the neutral species began nodding. The delegates who had walked out of the banquet were looking thoughtful. The Valkyrie, exposed and isolated, had no choice but to accept the Council's vote to censure them for interference in coalition affairs. The vote on human membership was postponed for further discussion. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat either. Humanity was still in the game. Katie walked out of the chamber with her head held high. Admiral Bennett caught up with her in the corridor outside. "That was not the speech we planned," the Admiral said. "No," Katie agreed. "It was better." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I suppose it was. But Katie, that person you showed them today, that was not the Saint. That was someone else entirely." Katie smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the diplomatic mask she had worn for so many years. "The Saint was never real, Admiral. She was just a story I told the galaxy because I thought it was what they needed to hear. But maybe what they really needed was the truth. Maybe they needed to see that humans can be gentle and fierce at the same time. That we can choose peace without being weak. That we are exactly what we appear to be, and also so much more." She turned and walked away, leaving the Admiral standing alone in the corridor. The good girl fighter had been exposed. And in the end, that exposure had been exactly what humanity needed. Not a weakness revealed, a strength finally shown.